So my friends, in this video we're going to be looking at the LG C2 55-inch on the left and comparing it with the LG C1 55-inch from last year on the right. Now this is the new Evo EX panel, the C2, and is it that much brighter than the C1? Well, what do you think? Don't forget to hit the red button to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up and click the notification bell to get my next video first. Now, just a couple of caveats before we go into too much detail. The C2 obviously is brand new out, so this has not really been run in any more than a few hours, whereas the C1 on the right has been run in for hundreds and hundreds of hours. We're using the same settings, that's cinema mode, and we've got all the other settings exactly the same. For the first time in a few years, the C range has now changed. The 55-inch and above are now completely different to what they were for the C1. You now have a central stand and it's made of a lighter material, and it's completely amazing how different the lightness is. In terms of the central stand, it's around 18.5 inches or 47 centimeters compared to around 38 inches or 95 centimeters. And the weight difference between the two are quite remarkable. The C2 now is just 14.4 kilos with the stand or 12.7 without, compared to 23 kilos or 18.9 kilos last year. So there is a massive difference in how much they weigh. And also, using that lighter material has made the backs completely different. This is the C2 55-inch, and as you can see, it's now made of more of a plasticky type back, which I think looks really good. There's no problem with this. It's got better cable management than on the C1 last year as well, and all of the inputs are now on the side. There are no rear-facing inputs. One thing to notice is also that the power cable is now much more central, and also the VESA mount is right in the middle of the TV rather than in the lower third than what was on the C1 last year. I haven't really noticed any difference in viewing angles, and I've certainly not noticed any difference in the reflections on the TV. There is no extra reflective coating, so therefore you have the same issues maybe in daylight. One thing that I have noticed though is that the bezels are just a few millimeters narrower on the C2 compared to the C1. So the overall look of it just feels a little bit more classy and a little bit more premium, which I do believe is quite an achievement because the materials used actually are probably the opposite. So it does look better and it looks more premium, yet they're using probably cheaper materials. But don't get me wrong, it doesn't look bad. The C1 was probably just a little bit more premium in terms of the materials, but not the look. Now, if you're wanting my first impression and quick summary without watching the whole of this video, what I would say is that the C2 is more of a capable machine than the C1. It's almost like a refined C1. The things that were good on the C1 are just a little bit better on the C2. Now, a lot of you will be looking at this image and think there is no difference between the two. And in some scenes, I do have to say, I was really surprised how little the difference is. However, when you engage things like auto tone mapping, then you'll see the extra capability of the C2. And that's almost impossible to get across within a YouTube video, and there'll just be some of these scenes on here where you'll see that is a bit more noticeable than others. I think that the C2 also handles most colors better than the C1. So one thing that I will be doing in probably about 3 or 4 weeks, when the C2 has had around 150 to 300 hours of use, I will do a detailed comparison where we're looking at things like shadow detail, tone mapping, and I can explain these areas in a bit more detail for you. And then I think that the differences will be a little bit more noticeable. At the moment, when this TV is just running in, it's going to be marginal, the differences. There'll definitely still be some scenes that you can really see how much better it is, but it won't be fully demonstrated until the TV has been running a little bit. Now also, one thing that I do want to investigate are the strange anomalies I found with this TV. Now if you take this scene, if you just look at our illustrious leader Boris Johnson's face, definitely the one on the left, the C2, looks far more natural and far better. But just pause this for a second. And now if you look at the whole right hand side of this image, you can see that the C2 has just completely blown out everything, and you just cannot make any detail there. Now bear in mind that we've got the cable box running through an AV amp, which is one source coming in, 2 sources going out to both the TVs, so it's running exactly the same signal. You've already seen that we've got this in exactly the same settings mode, And so therefore that is a real strangeness. It's a real anomaly, and I'm going to have to look into it a little bit more. Now, when comparing a newer version for last year's TV, it is sometimes very easy just to run exactly the same tests and also exactly the same settings. And what we must remember is that this is a new TV. It's been updated. It's going to react differently. It's got a new processor. And so what we'll do over the course of the next few weeks is really try and hone down those fine settings and get this TV looking as good as it possibly can. And then we'll do the same with the C1 for the previous year, and then we'll come back and do another side by side. But in terms of things like the motion tests and the color tests, what we found is that there was very little difference between the two. The brightness gain on the C2, which yes is quite obvious in these scenes, you wouldn't probably notice if the TVs were in separate rooms, and so it's how much are you prepared to pay for that marginal improvement. But what we will do is spend time trying to get these pictures exactly the best that they can possibly be after 150 to 250 hours, and hopefully we'll see a bigger difference. Now, one thing that I do think is improved on the C2 this year is the motion handling. Last year on the C1, if you turned on any true motion at all, then it made it very soap opera-y, and that effect is something which, for me personally, I don't like. However, this year on the C2, it does seem that they've just dialed that back a little bit, and now there is a little bit of give, so you can have it on without it being horrendous. Another test which I'll do when we've reached around 250 to 300 hours will be a black crush test. Certainly with HDR tone mapping turned on, there was no evidence at all of any black crush. However, I did find that on some SDR scenes, especially playing games, it was still noticeable. So again, I'm going to have a play with that, and then I'll report back to you in another video as to what settings where it was very, very clearly obvious that it was still there. In fact, on some scenes, it was worse than the C1, and then on others, it was certainly a lot better. HDR tone mapping turned on, it certainly fixes it, and there's no evidence of it. Okay, so if you've just skipped straight ahead to the summary, well, this is going to be for you guys. I don't think that if you were hoping for a night and day difference between the C1 and the C2, you've not got that. It definitely is far, far closer in the majority of scenes than what we probably first expected. However, I think the capability of the C2 is far improved on the C1, and what I mean by that is after a few firmware tweaks, I do believe the C2 will show more difference, and I do think it's more capable. It's definitely handling motion an awful lot better straight out of the box, and I think that that will just continue to improve. And some of the issues that we're having, and I'm sure there's going to be other people that have got other issues as well, I think those will be addressed with some firmware updates. But overall, I would say that the C2 just appears to be the smarter TV. The changes that you make can be more subtle, and it doesn't necessarily ruin other picture settings. And so therefore, you can switch between the two easier, depending on your location, depending on whether you're in a light room, dark room, for instance. So once the TV does hit around 200 to 300 hours of use, we will do a best things about it, a worst things about it. We'll look at all of these areas which you're interested in, black crush, BFI, all of these things, and hopefully come up with whether you should buy the C2 or save the money on the C1. If you're looking at buying one of these now, well, my probably view would be the best value at the moment is the C1, but it doesn't mean to say that the C2 is a bad TV in any way. It's just expensive at the moment. But guys, I hope that this video has shown you that there are not that many differences, but there are some subtle ones that you need to consider. Thank you so much for watching it. If there's any questions, please leave them in the comments.